All right, so a couple of little things first. I found a way to set up the content type globally for all the requests. Apparently, this should work. I haven't actually tested it, but from what I found, it should do exactly what it says. So let's try that. If I add that to the API somewhere in, oh, I just did actually. Yeah, I just haven't tested it. There you go. Right. Yeah. So in case you wanted to do that too, this is the code. And well, we'll test it. So because of that, hopefully we won't have to do this anymore, right? The setting up of the MIME type with every response. Hope not. We'll see how that works. So actually, if I go to, let's see. So I just made the modifications as I said, and it seems that when I do a get, I still get, if I look at the output, it still looks like JSON, right? The headers, it actually says application JSON, so that's okay. Yeah, so my global setting actually did work. Okay, so that's a little thing, but it just will save us having to set it everywhere for every URL. All right, let's keep going. So last time we were actually looking at the client, which is a very interesting thing, and we'll also go back to the server side a little bit. Today, I'm just going to clean this up. Validate to do. Oh yeah. All right. So let's see. So from the four operations, right? Creating, retrieving, updating, deleting. We've got two. The next one that's easy to do is the delete. So let's do that one. So we do have a delete button. I mean, easy is a relative term. Guys, to be able to do both delete and to do edit, you need to be able to select a record, right? So when I click on a record, I need to know which record I clicked on, right? So I need to know which is the current record, in other words, right? So you guys do this with me. On top of the script here, we're going to add a few some variables. We're going to say var current ID. We're going to set it to 0, which was what? ID of the currently selected item, 0 if known, right? If nothing is selected, we'll put a 0 there. We don't have authentication yet, so we'll just do that one. So current ID, and then in the HTML we're generating, I need an on click. I mean, now here's the thing. I don't really want an on click. I want, how I say, I want an on click, but not from jQuery. I want an on click from JavaScript. You see, when I'm generating, I'll just see that when I do the refresh to those right here, right? So I'm generating the headers, and then for every row, I generate all the data, right, in a row. I would like to know that somebody clicked on that particular row, so I can load it, right? So then I can either, what can I do? Either change it, modify it, update it, or I can delete it, right? Just like kind of what we did in Swing or C#, right? So do this with me in the TR here. We're going to add an on click for the entire row. And let's call the method, the function rather, select item, like this, right? And what we're going to do, we're going to give it one parameter, right? So you guys did on click, I'm sure, JavaScript. I know you did JavaScript, right? So we'll do select item off, and then we're going to give the ID of the item selected, which is what? Well, the same thing as here, right? So we'll put another single quotes. Careful with the quotes here, because you see we've got two strings here that get three strings really that get concatenated. So careful with the quotes. You see these are, so this is one string single quoted, right? And this is another string single quoted. inside of which there is a double quote here to open and double quote here to close. And in between, I'll put the ID. Okay, so now this is another one of those template things when we're using JavaScript to generate HTML and JavaScript. Right, that's what we're doing. We're using the language to kind of generate itself. Right, this is JavaScript generated by JavaScript. And that's okay, we do that. Okay, so we'll do the to do ID call, and then, well, then we'll need to actually define that that function, right? So we'll say function select item, and well, ID is a parameter, right? And then what? What do we do? Well, there is two ways to do it. One is we could technically, yes, it's possible. We could try and copy that information, see from here. I could, for example, give those classes, right? I could give this class to do ID, to do task, and so on. And using that, I could have a selector that will find me the value inside of here, here, and here. I could do that. I just copy the data from inside those cells into my inputs on the right-hand side, so I can edit them. And that would be okay. There's nothing terribly wrong with that. But in our API, we already have a method here to get a single item. Look, we got this one, fetching one record. So we might as well use it, and also gives me an excuse to show you how to do that. Okay. So we're gonna use that one. So we're going to run an Ajax query. I'm going to run an Ajax query. So we'll do $.ajax. And actually, you know what? How about we just borrow the Ajax query from here? So just copy, not this one. Where's the get? The refresh. Yeah. Just grab this, essentially this part, because it will be pretty much the same. Okay, let's close this curly semicolon. I think we're okay here. Now the URL will be slightly different because we need to put the ID of the to-do. No problem, /+ID, right? So the URL will have ID at the end. It's still a get, we're still just fetching it. And the result is not a to-do, but it's not a to-do list, but rather a single to-do. Right, so we should call the variable appropriately. Now, the computer doesn't care what the name of the variable is, but just we don't want to confuse ourselves. It's not a list, it's a single to-do. Okay, so let's do that. And then what do we do when we actually fetch it? Well, a couple of things. One is we need to actually set this variable up here so that we know that an item is currently selected, because that will be necessary for further logic of our application. So we'll say current ID equals, well, the ID that was loaded, right? Or to-do ID, it's going to be the same thing. It's to-do ID or ID, right? Or the parameter, because they will be the same. And then we have to put our data into, well, into the right-hand side, so we can actually display it and then possibly edit it. Now, see, there is a span here called current ID, which we haven't used yet. This is for displaying the ID of the currently selected item. I know we haven't used this one yet. That's where we will. Okay, so we'll say now, we'll say find me current ID, HTML, and set it to do ID as well, so we can display the ID, right? And then we need to do the same thing with the inputs. So find me input, we said what is there? We have name is task, right? And then we call, so if you call val like this without any parameters, that means you're reading the value. But if you give it a parameter, then that means you're setting a value, right? So the to-do has a field task, and we're going to set it, right? And we'll do the same thing with the other one. We had a due date as well, so let's do that one. So input name as due date, right? Dot val, and we'll do to-do due date, right? And the last one is a tiny bit tricky because it's a checkbox, right? So this one actually, I remember this gives me a little bit of trouble because they changed the way this is done between I think it was jQuery 2 and jQuery 3, which was it? We were using jQuery 3, yeah. They changed it between jQuery 2 and jQuery 3. These days, it's done this way. So we're actually setting the property checked or not, right? Depending to true or false. We're setting property check to true or false. If to do is done, then it's going to be true. Otherwise, it will be set to false. So that actually shows or not doesn't show that. Well, actually, it turns the checkbox on and off. Okay. And then we need to make sure that the right-hand side actually shows, right? Because when you click on the item, the right-hand side it's not visible yet. So we want to show it. So we'll say, find me the view, add, edit pane, and show it. And I think that's almost it. Oh yeah, and we should change the button. I think did we change the button yet? I thought we save or add. No, we didn't actually. We had hide. Where was the show? Yeah, we did. Yeah, we were changing the name of the button. So we'll do the same thing here. Yeah. So we'll say update to do. Okay, and then we have to what? Enable the delete button, which we were disabling here. So one more, and we should pretty much be done. Disabled, false. Yeah, that should do it. Okay, let me test it, and then after that, I'll give you a moment to make it work as well. Let me see if it works. Refresh. So I click on one of them. Okay, there you go. See what happens? Whenever I click it, the data gets loaded on the right-hand side and delete button is active. Okay, now it looks nice, but behind the scenes, if we actually look at what's happening on the network especially. So let's go to the console first. Okay, so there's no errors in JavaScript. That's good. Let's go to network. So right now I fetch all the to-dos. Now look what happens when I click on one of them. Let's say buy milk. So I access /todo/1. You see it's right there. That's the URL that gets accessed. I load the information, which is this, right, from the server using the API, and then I interpret it as JSON, and I load it up into the right-hand side over here. Right, so quite a bit of work. Yeah. Any questions on this at this point? So now that we got the select item working, now we can finally either delete it or update it. We could do delete first since it's easier to handle. So why not? So let's do delete. So we have a button event handler on click. So guys, where do we put it? It has to be inside of document ready again, right? So let's just say at the end here you had the save or add, right? Just before the document, before the end of document ready. You see, you have to be careful here. Where do you put it, right? That's why indentation is so important. All right, so put it up here. And let's say, let's find, we just have a button delete. You see at the bottom here, I added, there's just button with ID delete. That's the one, that's the one. So we activated it, now it's time to handle it. So we have delete, and we're going to have a click handler, anonymous function as usual, right? Nothing strange here. And then what do we do? Well, I would just make sure that the current ID is not a 0, just in case, just in case for example, we forgot to disable the button when we should, right? So I'll say, if current ID is a 0, then return, waiter, return, right? Right, means we're not modifying, we're probably adding, so we won't do anything. Now the delete button should be disabled anyway, but just in case it wasn't, we can't delete item 0 anyway, right? Next, what I would do, I would ask the user, I would say, there is a function called confirm, which is a message box. Again, this is kind of a 1990s solution. These days, what we would usually do, we would use something like Bootstrap to show a message box in the middle of the screen, asking yes or no, something like that, use the HTML/Z positioning, right, to show something on top of the screen, right, something more user-friendly, right, but this course, this part of the course is focused on the APIs, not so much of the on the graphical interface. So we won't do that here. So we'll say something like, are you sure you want to delete this item, right? And essentially this checks if the confirm returns false, then we return. Right, so if the user says cancel, essentially, then we just return, we don't delete it. Okay, and then time to make the call. So the call will look at pretty much what we have below. We could borrow, let's see, well, any of those really, just, you know, borrow the top of it. Yeah, we have to make some modifications here though. So first of all, the URL is todos slash plus parent ID. Now, please make sure you put the slash in here, right? Second, the method or the type here is delete. It has to be all capital letters for this to work, most likely. So keep it this way. And then data type JSON. We're not actually sending any data, so it doesn't matter, but we could keep it. That's okay. It doesn't hurt anybody. And then when we're done, we could do alert. Again, I'm not a big fan of alerts, guys. This is just because we want to have an explicit confirmation of our operation. This is the first the first time really we're doing it. That's why we're kind of being very explicit about the operations, you know, doing alerts and confirms and whatnot, right? But this, you know, this is not something that you would do, you know, maybe if you went back to 1990s, maybe. Okay, so alert will just say deleted successfully. And by the way, there is going to be a result returned here, which will be just true. So you normally don't have to display it, but just for the purpose of the exercise, I will actually display the value that I'm getting back. Right? What am I going to get back from return? Let's just see that here we had, excuse me, for delete, right? I'm just going to write either true or false that tells me if the item was really deleted. That's all. So I should see true here, right? Again, normally we wouldn't really show that to the user, but it's okay. And then what? Then we will hide the view at edit pane and set the cursor. So we have a few things here to do, quite a few. We'll say refresh to-do list. Definitely will set the current ID to 0 because nothing is selected because we just deleted the item, right? And then we'll hide the view at edit pane. So we'll hide it. And finally, yeah, that's it. That's pretty much it. Okay, let me test it. I'll try and delete one of my items. And let's see how that works out. So I click here and I'll say, oh, I messed up something. Hold on. Something went terribly wrong. So let's go to the console. Unexpected end of input. Okay, so I got a typo there. Probably I have some unbalanced curly brackets or something like this. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that explains it. So this curly is never closed. Oh yeah, Definitely. That's what happens. That's it. Better. Let's try again. No, still. There we go. Yes. So now it got loaded. Okay. So I click on item. Let's say number 7. Right. It gets loaded here. Right. If I look at the network, I just loaded it. Right. And I say delete. Are you sure? Cancel. Yeah. It doesn't get deleted. Delete again. Yes. Okay. Deleted successfully is true. Right. So the delete request should have gone out right here. Right. Say okay. And then there you go. Item number 7 is gone. Right. So the URL is same, but I'm actually doing a delete here. You see this one was a get for item number 7, and this one is a delete for item number 7. Okay. All right. I'll take any questions if you have them. Otherwise, I'll give you a couple minutes to make it work. Next thing I want us to do is to have some indicator while the API is working. Now, what do I mean by that? You see, when we make a call to an API like this, there's no guarantee as to how long it will take to complete it. It could be half a second, it could be 30 seconds, we don't know. So we would like usually to give the user some sort of a visual indicator saying, hey, we should wait, right? So the way to do that is to show usually something graphical to tell the user, well, please wait, please be patient, right? Something like this, right? You guys all know those little swirls or rotating things, or whatever that the case may be, right? Any of those, right? Some of them are, well, we usually want the moving ones, right? Maybe, there we go, right? Any of those? Well, this one's not moving, unfortunately. All right, so we're gonna grab one of those, preferably transparent. That'd be best. Transparent are best. Oof, yeah, I'm not getting much here. This one can hypnotize us. Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the previous one. I had some really nice. Let's just go with this one. This one seems, you see, has a this one is small, 128 pixels. That's just enough for us, and it has transparent background. It seems. I'll just open that in a new tab. Yeah, you see now it's white, right? So that tells me it should really be transparent. All right, I'll give you the URL. Please download it and save it. You want to save it in, let's just see, Slim Auctions. No, that's not where we are. In To The Rest. And let's call it, oh, why is it a TXT document? That is weird. Why on earth would that be a TXT? Yeah, I'm going to try and call it swirl.gif. I'll just test it. Can I open it? Okay, there you go. I managed to open it. Yeah, so for some reason it wants to save as a TXT. Yeah, so just save it as a swirl.gif, lowercase, in the main directory of your project. Right here we got the swirl in the main directory of your project. Then what we're going to do, we're going to plug it into our code. And the way I want to do that is, okay, I'm going to give you the code, but just put your cursor in here. So we want it at the end of centered content. You see centered content div is right here, right? I want it at the end of it. Okay. And I'll give you the code. Okay, so the code looks like this. And let's just check if it actually works properly. So if there you go, here's my swirl, right? I position it just in the smack middle of it, right? Again, we could do better, but for what we need, this is just exactly what we need. So for what we're doing. All right, so here's the piece of code just to put it at the end of centered content. So still inside of centered content. So let's continue here. So we got the swirl, right? Now the swirl keeps on showing all the time, so we need to hide it initially, right? So first thing is, I think we could give it, visibility hidden initially. So we'll do here visibility hidden. By the way, I am not a big fan of putting inline styles like this. This is an exception we're making, okay? Because there's only one of those things. There's only one swirl. It's only on this one page, and we don't care today and tomorrow, okay? But normally, not a big fan of this at all. Okay, so what this should do is this should hide the swirl initially. Right, you see when I reload, it's not there anymore. So I just did the visibility hidden. Okay, and then when do I show it? Well, let's test it. To be able to test it, we need to delay the PHP a little bit, because PHP right now is very fast because we're running it on the same machine. It's going to respond instantly. So even if I show the swirl and I hide it, I may not actually see it, or it might just kind of show for a splits of a second. So what I will do, I will artificially, just for the testing here, I'm going to slow things down. So guys, when we're doing the get, go here into API PHP. what I'll do just before the return response, I'll say sleep, right? And I'll say sleep 3 seconds, which will simulate a delay of 3 seconds when I'm refreshing the page. I could also use middleware for that, not just think for about it. You know what? Hold on. You know what? Move this. Did you guys add this yet or not? Oops. If you haven't, I'm going to give you this chunk of code. This should go above the index. Yeah, let's do that. That's middleware, right? This one was used to set the content of the response to always be application JSON. Right, and what I'll utilize it what I'll make it do right now, I'll just add a delay of 3 seconds as well. So what should happen now is if I reload is, okay, I just messed something up, hold on. Oh, it says pending, you see, 3 seconds, right? So I refresh, 1, 2, 3, magic, right? Shows up after 3 seconds. There you go. Okay, so now that we got the delay, beautiful, yes. So now the swirl should show, right? The swirl should show. By the way, you put this where? Just above your get of slash, right? Okay. All right, let's go back to the client. So what do we want to do? We want to show the swirl whenever there is a request happening. So let's start with 1. Let's do the refresh first. So just before the refresh happens, I'll say that I want to show the swirl, right? So I'll say the swirl has an ID, I think it was called wait for it. There you go. So you wait for it. I was thinking about calling it legendary, but then I changed my mind. Anyway, let's just see. Wait for it, show. That should do it. Let's see if it works. Doesn't seem to. Okay, so we need to, there's a glitch here. Hold on. Resume recording. Yeah. So guys, so as I said, the issue was, and we've had that before, it's kind of a strange thing they do. In jQuery, when you're doing show hide, they do not manipulate visibility, which would be kind of the normal way, I think, of doing that, but they actually change the style to display none. So when you say hide, it actually says display none. So we have to follow this. So modify this div here, set it to display none initially. Instead of visibility hidden, set display none. Okay, and then when you do wait for it show, this should show the swirl, right? So how do you know it's working? Well, when you refresh, you should see the swirl, right? So you set it to visibility none, and then it shows. There you go. Okay, all right, good. So then when do we hide it? Well, we could hide it in done over here, and that'll be okay. But there is a slight glitch here. Let me show you what I mean. So let's just don't do it yet, but let me just show you what the problem is. So we'll say wait for it hide, right? So in the done right here, I'll say wait for it hide, and that seems to be working okay, but not quite. Let me show you what I mean. 1, 2, 3 show. So you see it disappeared, the swirl. So I hid it, right? That's exactly what I wanted. But watch this. What if I have an issue with my Ajax? So for some reason, for example, my to-dos, there is some problem here. Okay, do I have am I throwing an exception here somewhere? No, hold on. Get body right response. There you go. Let's say just for the fun of it. Okay. Let's just do this. Or I have, okay, you know what? I got a better idea. Oh, how about I have a 500 error? So I'm fetching my to-dos, okay? But let's say my SQL query breaks. Okay, now watch this. 1, 2, 3. Ajax error. Okay. And then look, I press OK, and the swirl continues. Is there an Ajax query in progress? No, there isn't. But the problem is that the done in my client is only called if the request was successful. So if this returns 200 something, it's considered successful and done is called, right? This anonymous function is called. But if it isn't, it is not. So if I get 400, 500, any of those, right, the done call never happens. So that would mean that we never hide the swirl, which is kind of weird. So what we want to do is we want to add a different handler here. The handler is called always. Always. Okay, and we're going to put the swirl hiding in there. So the swirl is always hidden, even if there is a failure fetching the data. Right? So if there are certain things that always need to happen, whether we have a successful or failed API request, you put it into always. Okay, let me show you how that works. Reload. 1, 2, 3. Ajax error. Okay, and swirl is gone. Right? Even though this one failed, right? This request failed. Right? That's why we need to do it this way. So let's go back to the API. I'm just going to unmess this. Okay. And then please make the same modification. So put the wait for it hide into always for the refresh to-do list. Okay, so I added, let me just summarize this. So I just added wait for it show before every Ajax query, and I added always that hides the swirl to every Ajax query. So I got one of them for select item. I'm loading a single item. Then I have refresh. I did the same thing, right? Show and hide, right? Delete, show and hide, right? And then save or add, which is only right now adding, right? That's the only one we've got. Show and hide, and that's it. Let's see if it works properly. Refresh. 1, 2, 3. There you go. Here's the list. If I click on an item here, see swirl 1, 2, 3. There you go, right? And I say, let's just say a different one. Well, this one, and I say delete. All right. Are you sure? Yes. See swirl 1, 2, 3. There you go. Right. Delete it. Okay. So the swirls seem to be working properly. Oh yeah, the refresh didn't quite work. Strange. Actually, for when I did the refresh. Oh, I know why. Okay, so there is one little thing here which we're not going to fix. You see, because when I'm doing the save or add, I call the refresh to-do list, and then after that, the wait for it happens. So why is that? Why does it matter? Well, because the refresh shows the swirl, but this one hides it again. So you see, after I delete it, I didn't see the swirl again. So the fix for this will be to just move the refresh to always, because it never hurts to refresh anyway. There's no reason not to. Okay, so we'll do refresh to the list, and I will move it this way. Yeah, let's try this again, because there should be a swirl while I'm refreshing. Right, so let's try it again. Do it now. I'll try and delete this. So delete, yes. So this is a swirl for delete. 1, 2, 3, and now should be swirl. Yes, see, now it's not showing. Yeah, so there's still, yeah, I still didn't fix it. See, there should have been another swirl showing for 3 seconds when I was when I'm refreshing. Guys, I'm gonna put a fix me on it. We're not gonna spend time trying to fix it at this point. I did my best. It's not working. It's okay. We got other things to look at. Okay, but in the real application, you would want to make sure that you handle it properly. Okay, forward. Next one is we need to do update. We need to do update. And to do update, we need to essentially modify the behavior of this save or add, right? So what we're doing right now here is we're grabbing the values. That's okay. We're creating it to the object and so on. And then we're doing sending a request. Now the request right now is always a post, which means what? We're creating a new record. But depending on the function, by the way, how do I know if I'm adding or I'm updating? Very simple. If current ID is a 0, I'm adding. If current ID is anything else, I'm modifying, right? That also means that when where's the add here? You see show add item, right? When I press, hold on a second. So when I press this button, this one, you see the add item over here, I should set there's a problem. You see the current ID is 9. See this shouldn't be there. This needs to be set to 0, both the display as well as the current ID variable, right? So I need to modify this again. Let's just do that. No item selected, so I'll say current ID is a 0. And also I need to set there was a span there, which was this, there you go, this one, which also needs to be set, in this case, to empty. Okay. So the logic gets changed here a little bit. So the current ID is a 0. Yeah, let's test it. I'll just change it. I'm just going to change the delay to 1 second because this is too long. We had just so we can see the squirrel. Yeah, that should be nice. Okay, good. So book of hairdresser. Yeah. So now I selected an item, right? But you see, if I press add item, see, this gets all cleared up. All right. So and the delete also disappears, right? I click on an item. Now delete is enabled. Right data is loaded. ID is loaded. I add item, right? Current ID empty, right? So my current ID, this one, will tell me if I'm adding or I'm updating. That's how I know, right? So let's modify this one. So here, there's only going to be a couple differences. First of all, let's look at the type of the request. If the current ID, if it's a 0, then I'm adding. So I'm doing a post. If it's not, I'm going to do a put instead. Would you agree? Right? Put means update. Right? So if the current ID is a 0, add. If it's not a 0, update. Right? We agree on that. And the second thing is the URL will differ a little bit. Because what? If the current ID value again is a 0, then what? Then the URL is /todos because we're doing a post, right? But if it is not, then I need to add / with the current ID to it, right? Because the URL will be something like /todo/5 if I'm updating the to-do item number 5, right? So I'm handling both add and update in one. This is for update, right? I need to specify the ID of the item I'm updating, and the method needs to be put. The data is the same exactly. I'm sending the entire object except for ID, right? So the data is exactly the same. And then the message here would be slightly modified. So it wouldn't always be added. It would be either, let's just do that one, record, either added or modified, one of the two, right? So I'll say again, if current ID was a 0, then would be added the message, right? Otherwise would be updated successfully. The rest of the functionality seems to me like it's almost the same, except if we were adding, we need to reset the current ID to 0, right? Because once you've added the record, excuse me, we were modifying, my bad. If we're modifying things, right? Once I've modified it, I probably should set the current ID to 0. And I think we're good. I think that should do it. Let's try that, refresh. Right, so let's say buy milk. Let's do 5%. Update to do. Record updated successfully. I'm missing a space there. Okay, and refresh. There you go. See, now I got 5%. Seems okay. Seems okay. Okay, any questions on this? Not hearing any yet. All right. Next, let's talk about authentication. Let's talk about authentication. Guys, you'll do this chunk with me because we need to modify the database. So go to the database. We're going to do to localhost phpMyAdmin. And we're going to give our application another table users. Right, so they go to date and to the rest. You guys are doing this one with me. It's easier to do it now than later. Okay, create table users. And let's see, we're going to need, let me think about it. We're going to need ID, definitely, yes. I'm just thinking the authentication, we could do an email actually. That's probably a good idea. Yeah, that's probably is a good idea. So we would have a username. Just a moment. Yeah, let's do email and let's do password. We're not encrypting the password. Varchar, what do we say? 350? What was it? 340? Something like that. Password varchar 100. That's good. Okay, so int ID, email varchar 340, password varchar 100. We don't have administrator level here. We're not doing any advanced differentiation between different users. We just have users. That's all we've got. Otherwise, we could have, is admin here, right? But we're not doing that. Okay, make the email. So there's a couple of indices we need to add here. So first of all, ID auto increment primary key, as always. And second, the email must be unique, right? So change this to unique index on the email because that's how we just press go. That's how we will differentiate between users. So there cannot be multiple accounts with the same email address. Okay, so when ready, press save. When ready, press save. So we did ID integer primary key to increment, email varchar 340, password varchar 100, and email is unique. Save. Okay, so that's one step. Next, to connect the two tables, we need the records to be owned by different users. So go to table to-dos. Go to table to-dos and to the structure. And what we're going to do, we're going to add a new column here called, we could call it owner ID or user ID or something like that. Yeah, let's call it owner ID, owner of the record. Okay, so here, see there's add one columns after ID. So change this to say after ID. See this? After ID, press go. So add one columns after ID, press go, and we're gonna call this owner ID. And that is all. Press save. We may need an index on it, we'll see later. Okay, press save. So the structure now says ID, owner ID, the I is uppercase, right? Task due date is done. Now we need to, we need to create a reference between the two, but there is a problem. You see, all the owner IDs right now are set to 0, and we don't actually have any owners, right? So do this with me again, create at least 2 owners. 3 would be okay, but 2 is fine, yeah. Don't give them IDs, this will be assigned automatically. So I'll do my usual, right, Jerry. There I go. So here are my two users. I got Jerry and Eva, ID 1 and 2. So what I just did is I changed the owner IDs for all the records to be one of those two users. So I did 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, right? I gave more or less half of the records to one user and half of the records to the other user. All right, so why do we need to do that? Because in a moment we will create a foreign key which will connect the two tables. When a foreign key is created and you already have data in the tables, then the relation is verified, meaning what? The owner ID will be pointing to user IDs. If the owner ID is pointing to a user ID that doesn't exist, database will refuse to create that foreign key. It will fail to create it, right? So that's why we had to assign those records to some users first before we create the foreign key. Okay, so now let's go to structure of the to-dos, right? And then click on the relation view. So structure, relation view, and then we'll create here a column owner ID pointing to date and to the rest users ID. There you have it. Restrict is good, save when ready. So I press saved and it should say that the SQL query succeeded, right? Anybody got an error here? I need to know. So just to double check this actually worked, click on the date to the rest and then go to designer, right? You should see the two tables are now connected, right? Like this, right? The owner ID points to user's ID. Okay, good. So now let's go back to our code, to the API PHP. And what we want to do is we want to add, as I said, user verification that is required to perform, well, pretty much any operations here, right? Pretty much any operations to succeed, they need to, because if I want to what, add a record, right, delete a record and so on, right, any of those, I need to authenticate. Okay, so let's do that. So let's just try with one first. So let's go to get to-dos. And guys, I'm going to do it and I'll give you the code afterwards. Okay, I just wanted you to create a database with me. So what I will do is I will need to verify in here before I send any data that the user is authenticated. And I also need to know which user is it, because I will no longer be sending back all the to-dos. I will be sending only the to-dos that belong to the currently authenticated user, of course, right? So the way I'll do it is I'll add a method here. I'll just put it at the end here somewhere. I had the verification here somewhere. There you go. So I'll add it just let's say here. I'll add a function. Let's call it get auth user ID. And I will give it a request as a parameter, and you'll see why in a moment. Don't worry, I did not forget about lunch. We'll go on lunch in a few minutes, just not yet. Okay, and I'm just going to grab the code here to explain it. All right, so what I'll do here is I need to fetch information about the authentication. So what I will be doing in my client, I will send authentication info, which is the username, which is an email, right, and the password using headers. Now there is, I could say, at least 3, maybe 4 different methods of sending authentication that you could use, right? And I think this is one of the simpler ones. I could also send them in the URL if I wanted to. Not a big fan of it. You could do that, right? You could use the basic HTTP authentication, which is fairly similar to this one, but unfortunately it does not work well with JavaScript clients. It works great on mobile or on desktop applications, not so much with desktop clients, unfortunately. I could use something very high-end like OAuth, open authentication, OAuth. Some of you were actually using that if you were plugging Facebook or any of the authentication frameworks, they actually use OAuth internally, right? And this is a solution that is kind of doing things by hand in a way, but it is almost the same mechanism as the basic HTTP authentication, except it works well with JavaScript clients, which is what we have. Okay. The point is you need to prove to the server that you are this user and you're authorized to access those records. So you're sending the username, which is an email, as I said, and you're sending the password, right? So what I'm doing here is I will be calling get auth user ID, and I'll give it as a parameter the request from PHP Slim, which is the object describing, well, what is coming from the user. And then I'll check, does the request have those two headers, X auth username and X auth password? By the way, you see the X? Yeah, this is because it's a tribute to X-Men. Just kidding. All right, guys, X is actually a type of a header you can create at will. You see, there is a lot of headers like content type, or any of those that we see. Let's say, let's just go, well, here, anywhere really, right? If I look at my network here, right, there's a lot of headers that are standard, right? I got access range, age, cache control, date, and so on. But also you see there are those X headers. X headers are not standardized. You can make them up and nobody can complain about it. You can make up any X header. You just do X dash and you write whatever you want to write, right? You can create your own headers if you want to. So that's just what I did here. Okay, I decided to add X auth username and X auth password headers to my application, and I have the complete right to do that. Okay, so I'm checking if the authentication is missing, because that's what I'm looking here, right? If it's not here, so I'm checking has header not, right? So if either the username or password is missing, then I will log it. I'll say authentication missing, and I will return a false from this function. By the way this works, again, it returns false if authentication failed or missing. Otherwise, it will return the numerical ID of the user who we authenticated, one of the two. Okay, then I'll say, well, let's extract them. And I'm just saying, get me the value of the header and get username, and give me the value of header password. Right, I know there's a 0 at the end. There's a technical reason for it. We don't care. It just needs to be there. Okay, so that extracts the username and password. Then I go to the database. I find the record, or try to find the record of that user, where the username is the email, really, right? And then I verify, did I find it? Did I find the record? And if I did find the record, did the password match? If it did, then set user ID to user ID. Right? Otherwise, keep it at false, right? And then finally, at the end, if I did not find the user or the authentication failed, I also will log it, right? Now, I know we had a different, nicer way of logging the remote IP address and whatnot, but this will do for now. Okay, so bottom line is this. This code will either return false if authentication is missing or invalid, or it will return the ID of the user who authenticated. Okay, so how do I use it? Well, let's just, as I said, we're just going to do one. So we had the fetch of all to-dos. So we had this one, right? So what I'll do is I'll call my get auth user ID. Let's do that one. So before I do any, before I do any queries, I need to do my valid authentication. So I'll check user ID is get auth user ID of request. So I call that, right? And then I check, did I find it? Right? So if now I know that user ID is never a 0, because there is no records with primary key 0. So I can just do if not user ID, which means what? If it's false, right? Then I know that the authentication has failed, right? Now I will use code 403, which I have the right to do. Let's see that. So we had HTTP codes rest. We had, there you go. So 403 is forbidden. Okay. Now, normally, if I was using HTTP basic authentication, I would actually return 401. But because, unfortunately, we're using a JavaScript client, this will mess it up. it just JavaScript clients, they don't do what I want them to do when we use that. So that's why I'm actually using forbidden. Okay, I'm saying, hey, access forbidden because, well, because it's forbidden. Okay, so I say 403 authentication failed, right? And I will send that information back to the client, right? And then if everything is okay, then what? Then the user ID has the ID of the user who authenticated. So all I have to do is I have to say select all from to-dos where owner ID is that user who authenticated. And then I will encode the list, right? Let's try this out, or I'm gonna try this out. So we'll do, if I do send, okay, so I'm gonna do another query here. So I'm fetching all the to-dos. This should fail. There you go, see 403 authentication failed. Why? Because I did not provide any authentication, did I? See, in the headers here, I did not provide any authentication. So I'll do that. I'll say X, let's see what we have. We had xauth username. There we go. I need those two. So I need xauth username. They are not case sensitive, by the way. So let's log in as, let's say, Eva, right? Just because. And then authentication password is for me, Eva123. Send. There you go. Right. So now I'm fetching records. So the authentication succeeded, right? And I fetch those two records who belong to Eva, right? And if I change the authentication, I'll say Jerry, I'm Jerry.com. By the way, if the password is invalid, I should still get my 403, right? There you go. Let's try this again. Jerry123 send. There you have it, right? So I'm fetching records of the user who authenticated and only that user. All right, guys, so that's all. So we would need to apply authentication to all of the requests, not just this one, right? And we also need to add it to the client because all I did so far is I just added that to Postman, right? So I'm just simulating a client here, right? Which sends the information in. So I need to, in the client, I need to be able to authenticate, right? And to do that, and again, I'm just doing this, guys. I'm going to explain and you guys will get the code later, right? What I will do here is I will add, well, I need to have two inputs. I need to have ability to log in, essentially, right? So I need to be able to provide the login information. So I'll add a div. I'm going to call it authentication pane right here. And I also have in my notes, I also have a registration pane, but I don't think we're going to be able to do that one. I think the login will suffice. So what I mean is that we won't be able to register a new user using the web interface. We just will be able to log in if you create the user in the database manually, which is totally okay, sufficient for now. Okay, so I'll do here, I'll add two inputs here in another pane called login pane, username and password, right? Where the username will be, of course, the email and a login button. Guys, these are not forms. You've noticed there is not a single form in here in this client, right? Because I never want to submit anything, right? When buttons are pressed and so on, or some actions are taken, I read the inputs, I do something with them, maybe I send an AJAX request, but I never submit anything here, right? There's no forms, no submit buttons over here, none, okay? That's something that's pretty characteristic of web apps like this. All right, so let's do the login pane. So with the login, first thing is, before I can actually list the contents of anything here, of the to-dos, I need to require authentication. So what I want to do is I want to hide the main app pane initially, and I want to show the authentication pane. So this will be shown normally. And here, what I'll do, I could do the same trick. I'll do the style, and I'll set display to none. Right. So I'll just do that. Right. So what will happen is, I'm going to get an error, but don't worry about it. So what will happen is, I know. But what it will do, it will show the login, right? And then when I press login, that's when I will attempt to actually fetch information from the API. So I will need to know at any time to perform a query, I need to know what the username and password are. So I'll add another variable here. I'll add username initially empty and password as well, initially empty. So this is my card authentication information. Okay, so I'll do that. And then let me just see. And then what? When we load, you see, I don't do the refresh to the list anymore. I'm going to comment this out, right? I don't do the refresh to the list anymore because it's too early. You see, when the HTML document loads, it needs to display login, right? Username, password, or the email password, and only then I can load the to-dos, right? So no longer will I be doing the refresh right away, right? So all I do here, I just display this, and I wait for the user to provide the username and password to authenticate, right? Now, when I do, so I'll have my, let's just see that I have my login button. I think that's what it's called. Let's just see that here. There you go. I have my login button. So I'll add a handler there. This has to be inside of my document ready, right? I'm still doing that. All of the on-click handlers have to be inside of document ready. So I'll put this one in here, and I'll say, find me the, let's get the login, find me the login button and on-click, right? Let's do, what do I need to do? Well, I need to extract the username and password from the inputs. So I'll do that, right? And I assign them to those global variables, right? So those are not local. These are the username and password over here, right? These are the global variables that I already have, right? And I'm just extracting them from those two inputs, right? And then what? And then I should try and hide the authentication pane. So I'll say, actually, I'm just gonna grab this from here. I will hide the authentication pane. I will show the main pane, which is the one with the list, right? And I will refresh the to-do list, right? So that's what I will do when user presses login. There is no actual Ajax request to log in. There isn't, right? So what I'm doing is I will attempt to refresh the to-do list. If this fails, I should go back to showing login, right? If this fails, I should display information saying authentication failed and hide the main app pane again and show the authentication pane again, right? If authentication fails, then I go back to the state where the user can enter their authentication information. But for now, let's just test this. Okay, so I'll save that and I refresh. So I say, let's do a correct authentication. So let's do jerry@jerry.com and I'll do jerry123. And that won't work yet. There you go. See, I'm getting Ajax error. Why? Because I didn't actually use that information to retrieve the data, right? You see, I saved the username and password in my variables, right? If I go here into the debugger, I could actually view information about, no, it's okay, information about user and password, global variables, and so on, but I actually need to use them. Where? In my refresh, right? So right here. See, it's actually not really that hard once you see the code. All we need to do is to send those two headers. You guys remember the two headers? What were they? Well, they were those auth username and password. We need to send those two headers along with our request, just like in the Postman, right? I said get on this URL, and by the way, also send those two additional headers. We need to do the same thing exactly, but from the JavaScript client, right? So to do that, we'll just add that information to our Ajax request. And it's actually, as I said, once you know it, it's actually not that hard to do. All we got to do is to add, let's say here, actually, no, let's do, hang in there. So I'll need comma, and then I add headers. There is a there is a field here I can add headers, which is an associative array of key value pairs, right? So it looks pretty much exactly like what we did here. I'm saying just, put 2 extra headers with whatever is the username, whatever is the password. Okay, let's see how that works. It should work. We'll see if it does. So again, let's do jerry@jerry.com, jerry123, login. There you go. I got it. No, don't save. No, never save for this. Right? See, I got my information. Now, if I look at the request that went through, right? Look at this is my to-dos request, right? This is the URL/to-dos. Let's look at this request headers. Look at that. See those two, right? That's how I send the authentication from the client to the server, so that the server knows who I am and can also fetch those records that belong to me. Okay. Any questions so far on the authentication side? So now that I got this working, now what happens when things don't work out too well, right? So let's say I authenticate, but I authenticate wrong. So I say login and Ajax error, and well, that's kind of not the state of application I want to leave it with, right? So the way this needs to be handled is that we need a custom error handler. There is another parameter here we can add called error, which is an anonymous function with a header that looks like this. It actually receives 3 parameters, right? This is an error, that's a field which points to or refers to this anonymous function, which takes 3 parameters, the X header, status, and which error was thrown. And I will need to handle that. So this will be called when there's a problem. Now I know we already have a global handler up here. See this one, right? The global handler. Well, we actually don't want to be using that anymore because it was okay for starters, but now that we're doing more sophisticated things, this is not really appropriate anymore. We should have error handling separately for every Ajax call that we make, because the reaction would be different. Okay, so what I want to do is just hang in there. So we were right. Where's my refresh? There we go. So right here. So what I want to do is I want to check what kind of error I got back. Why? Because look what happened here. This is 403. What's it? What's that? That tells me that the authentication failed. For my application, if I get 403, I know that the authentication failed. What should I do if authentication failed? Well, I already told you I need to what? Hide the main application pane, the one with the list that didn't load, right? And then show login form again, right? Show the login inputs again. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'll check. Actually, the way to know what the code is, there is JQX header, there is status here, right? Oh, actually VS Code knows. That's nice. Okay. I check it. Is it 403? Which means what? Authentication failed, right? So if authentication failed, what do? I will, as I said, hide the main pane of the application, the main content, show the authentication inputs, right? I also should show an alert saying authentication failed, right? Would you agree? I think that's a reasonable thing to do, to tell the user, because otherwise it's just gonna, you try to log in and then just brings you back to login. So you want to show an alert, right? So let's try this one. Let's see how that behaves. So if I reload now and I say something, login, there you go, authentication failed. I press OK, and you see I go back to login. Okay, if I want to, I may also clean up the inputs, not absolutely required, but I could clean up the username and password being entered, right? And that's pretty much it. There's one thing missing here. What if I get a different error? I mean, it could happen that I get a different error, right? If I get a different error, I just want to inform the user. I don't necessarily need to bring them back to authentication, but I just want to show an alert. So I'm saying, well, listen, if this was forward read and authentication failed, and this is other error, so I just will inform the user about it, right? So there is the X header response text, which is just whatever the server sent, right? And then the status that that failed. Okay, so let's try this out. Let's try this out. Yeah. Reload here, login. Oh yeah, that's gonna fail. There you go. Authentication failed and brings me back to login. Good, good, good. Right, and then let's log in properly. So I'll do my Jerry. That's it. So I'm getting that. Now, if I mess something up, so let's say the API has a problem, right? Let's just create a. I'm going to create a 500 error, you know. So I'll do get all to dos, and I'll just create a 500 error. So I'll just, you know, I'll click on, and I'll say update. There you go. So that will trigger the get. There you go. Record updated successfully, and now this will trigger refresh, which will fail with 500. And there you go. You see our get? It says Ajax 500 internal error status 500. There you go. This is the text that is sent by the API when SQL query fails, which is right. See this one right here, the DB error handler, the 500 internal error status error, right? And then 500 is whatever the status is over here, right? So again, normally I would probably not want to display this kind of low-level information to the user, but you know, we're only starting to learn about APIs, so that's okay. All right, good. So that's pretty much it for dot handling for that problem. Now this we're going to have to do that for every one of our requests. So when I'm doing get of all to dos, I'll have to do this error handling. When I'm doing over here this get, right, I'll have to do the same thing. I'll have to, let's just grab this. So I'll have to, when I'm grabbing a single item, right, I need to provide authentication as well, right? Otherwise it breaks. Look, if I click on one of them, oh, right, I didn't actually implement, hold on. I did not actually implement authentication on the server side yet for other URLs. I haven't done that yet. So let's fix it. So, so over here, I'll need to do the same thing for all the other Ajax requests, right? And what I want to avoid having to copy paste all this. So what I'll do, I'll just put it into a separate method. You know, I'll just grab this. Let's put it into function. Let's call it HTTP error handler, and it will have to take all the same 3 parameters that the original did. I'm just going to put them here, right? And that's pretty much it. I'm just going to fix the indentation here. It looks decent. There we go, right? And then over here, all I have to do, I just need to call it. So I'll say HTTP error handler, and I'll give it the same parameters, right? Just like this. And yeah, so I'll do that. I'll do that for all the other requests, as I said, right? So here I had my my get of a single item. I'll do the same thing, right? And then let's just borrow this chunk. Yeah, and then I'll go to where else do I have? I only had 2 requests. No way, I had more. Delete. There you go, right here for delete. Same thing, right? I need to send the headers, and I need to handle the error, right, if it happens. And then I think I had one more here. There you go, right, this one. So we said this was for the add or update. There you go, right? So I have to send authentication here as well. Okay, so I think that was all. These were all the Ajax methods. Yeah, so that should take care of the client. Now let's go back to the server, and I will add authentication to all the other URLs as well. Right, so for now, I just had this one, the get to do. So I'm just going to borrow this, and then we'll adjust the rest of the code. Okay. So we'll get to this right now. So that was all records. Now, what if I'm fetching one record? Okay, good. So I'll do the same thing, require authentication, 403 error if there is none. And then I need to modify the select query, right? Because what I want to do, I want to say select where the ID, but I only will fetch those records that actually belong to that owner. So I have to say, and owner ID is the authenticated user, right? So I need to do it this way, right? And I need to do this, well, this way everywhere. So here's an interesting thing. What if there is a record? Let's say there is a record with ID number 5, and the record exists, but it is not mine. It doesn't belong to the currently authenticated user. Well, if that happens, then this item will not be fetched, and I will actually get 404, right? So if I'm, even though the record actually technically in the database, it does exist, but it isn't mine. Because of that, I will actually get a 404 on it, which is totally okay. Okay, right, let's continue here. Post, that's an interesting one. So when I'm creating a record, right, I need to what? I need to put the information. So when I'm doing the insert right here, right, I actually need to add a piece of information there about who the owner is, right? So I'll do the same thing at the beginning, right? I'll do the authentication required, right? Over here, the same chunk, right? And then when I'm doing the insert, I'm giving it an associative array item, and I'll just add to it. I'll say item of owner ID is, well, the authenticated user, right? Is going to be the owner of the newly created record. So whoever is logged in will be the owner of the newly created record. The rest stays the same, I think. The rest should be okay. Let's do put and patch, right? Same thing. I need authentication, right? Required to do put and patch. And then what? And then validation won't change. Query first row, that shouldn't change either. Except, oh yeah, except yes, it will. And owner ID is user ID, right? Same thing here, right? If I'm updating a record, right, or modifying a record, I need to make sure it exists already, but it has to be mine. I have an issue here with double quotes, right? I can only modify a record that is mine. I cannot modify somebody else's record. Okay, so that's that. And if I try to, I get 404, which is okay, right? The query fails. The request fails. Delete, the same thing, guys. I can only delete what? Those records that are mine, right? I can only delete those records that are mine. So I'll do the same thing, authentication again, required, right? And then delete where what? Where ID is the ID and owner is the authenticated user, right? I can only delete a record that I am the owner of. Makes sense, right? Okay, let's see if there's anything else. The validation of to-do should remain the same. There's no need to change anything here. I think we're okay. I think we're fine. Let's test it. Let's see how that works. Reload and let's do Eva at Eva. Okay, so I'm getting 500, means I messed up something. Great. Okay, guys, so troubleshooting. First troubleshooting is always console, right? Second, network, right? And this one, let's see the response, internal error. So it doesn't tell me much, right? Where do I go from there? I would go to the logs. I will go to errors log and say, okay, select query. Okay, there you go. So I still, because I broke the query on purpose. You guys remember the index was broken on purpose? That's okay. So I'll just go and I'll fix that. was in the to-dos get. There we go. Yeah, see, I didn't actually fix it. There we go. Let's try again. So, yeah, can I actually? No, it doesn't. It's going to be faster just with that. All right, let's do it again. So, eva.com, login, and there you go. Got it, right? So I got 2 of those. Good. So now I do. Let's test the rest. So I'll say add item. And I say, wherever, what should I do today? Take a break. Yeah, that'd be nice at some point. Done, no. Add to do. Record added successfully. Okay, I'm glad, right? Now, when the request was sent, I can actually see it here. See, this is, no, that's the refresh. This is the post. See, this is the post that was creating a new item, right? And this was the data that was being sent over here. And look at the authentication. The authentication is sent as well, right? And if I go to the database, as expected, the new to-do, see that take a break, the owner ID is 2, right, Eva? Okay. All right, good. We should test the rest as well, since we're on it. So let's see what else we've got. Let's do an update. Something's off with the, no, this is okay, actually, yeah, take a break soon. Yeah, it actually worked fine. And deleting, okay, book of hairdresser, let's delete this one, or let's, yeah, let's say delete, yes, I do, and delete is successfully true. There you go. Okay, so I did an add, I did an update, I did a delete, and I can see the list. So I think it seems to be working fine. I'll take questions at this point. So let's talk about sorting. So what I want to do is I want to sort things on the client in the API. In particular, over here, when I'm fetching multiple records, I want to be able to say order by and order it by anything I like. I could order it by ID, right? By the description of the task alphabetically, by due date, or even whether it is done or not, by any of the columns that I have, except for the owner ID, because it doesn't make sense and the user doesn't see the owner ID anyway, right? So by any other fields. So what I mean is I want to be able to create URLs that look like this. I could do to-dos, right? So I could do get to-dos, right? That's fine. Or I could do get to-dos, and I could say sort by equals due date. See, just like this. So I could actually have a query that requires sorting. We actually saw that, you may or may not remember, in the very short video about REST APIs, right? We saw that it was possible to specify, for example, with Facebook, which fields do you want to fetch? Because Facebook, when you're looking at the information about the user, gives us a lot of information, like a few hundred lines, right? But we could actually say, I only want to see those 3 or 4 fields, right? And then the way you do that, you would give it a parameter. Now, as a designer of the API, you decide, or in this case, I decide which parameters I will allow, which parameters I will understand, right? Some APIs, for example, say that allow you to do things like, they actually support multiple formats. They say, I can return the data in JSON by default, but if you tell me format XML, I can actually return them as XML instead if you want me to, right? It's a possibility. And the same thing about receiving, actually. They could also handle multiple formats. But in our case, we're sticking to JSON because we're doing JavaScript client, so there's absolutely no reason to use XML. But if I was doing a mobile application, then maybe if I was using Java on the desktop, definitely XML would be the most fitting solution. Okay, so in this case, we're just going to do the sorting. Okay, and to do that, we will first implement the server side. So I will say this. I will check if I received information about the the sort by. And the way to do that in PHP Slim is, we may or may not have done that yet, right? We have something called query params. And again, this is part of the cookbook, right? So we could do request get query params, this one. And what it does, it gives us an associative array of key value pairs where the keys are those parameters like sort by or whatever else you like. I said, what was it? I said format. Right. So if I had this, if this was the URL, right, then my query params would be associative array with two key value pairs. This would be one key and its value, and this would be the other key and its value. Okay. I'll remove the XML since we don't need it. So I'll ask for the query params, and out of it, I will only try to get the sort by value. So I would do something like this: query params. Nope. Query params of sort by. The problem is that sort by is actually optional. Meaning if it was not specified, if I didn't say it, then what's the sort by ID? That is the default, or I want it to be. Now I can set any default I want, but I'm going to go with ID. So I'll say if sort by was not specified, then assume it is ID. And also another thing is, if this is the call that I will get, the 73 line, right? Then this will actually give me an error during PHP execution. I will actually get a warning there that will mess up my HTML saying, you're accessing an element of an array that doesn't exist, right? Because if somebody did not provide sort by, then I don't have it in the array. That's why I need to do is set. So I have to check is set. If the query params indeed is set, then that's great. Then assign its value. Otherwise, assign ID to sort by. All right. So I'm checking. Was I given sort by? Yes, use it. No, use ID. Right, as the order by. And then there's another hurdle here. See, what if somebody says this? Or actually, in Canada, they would say this. Can I sort by color? No, I can't. That's an invalid query, or invalid request, rather. It actually falls under the code 400. See over here, bad request. It falls under 400. So what I need to do is I need to check that if I got the sort by, indeed, if I did, is it one of those that I allow? Right? Is it one of those that I allow? So how do I do that? Well, we already seen this one. There is this very nice in array function where I can say, well, is the sort by, right, one of those values? Meaning, can I find sort by in this array's values, right? Does it match one of them, right? So I have ID, task, due date, and is done. These are the parameters that I permit. Right, so I'm checking here. Here's a negation, meaning what? If I did not find it. So if somebody says, as I said, color, it's not found in the array. That's an error, right? So I should treat it as such. So what I'll do, I'll generate a 400 response, just like this, like we did before, right? So with status 400, print out JSON 400 invalid sort by value and send it. Okay. And then one last modification over here. Finally, we need to actually sort it. So I will add the order by, sort by, right? And excuse me, no. Okay, now this one is dangerous, guys. We have to actually do here something called literal. You see, this is not a 1. This is not a 1. This is an L. Why? Because sort by is not a value. Okay, you see over here in an SQL query, when you say order by, this is not a value. This is what? A name of a column. You do not quote names of columns, right? If I'm writing a query, let's go back here. If I'm writing a query, let's say this one, right? So I say select from to-dos. Let's just go with this one. So I'll go to SQL. I'll say select from to-dos where order by. I say order by due date, like this. Well, actually, it may work in MySQL. I've heard it. Yeah, okay. So MySQL is very permissive. It shouldn't really do that. Other SQLs will probably not let you. Okay, I'll do it again. But generally, you would just do order by due date, where due date is the name of a column. See, like this. Okay. So generally, we don't quote those things. Now, as I said, MySQL is very permissive, and it will actually let you put single quotes around it, which is weird, right? But if you ever find yourself in need of putting a chunk of SQL without quoting it, %L needs to be used. Now, this one is dangerous. Why? Because it would enable, if you're not careful, SQL injection. But in this case, it's not an issue. Why? Because I already verified that this %L, which is sort by, is one of those values. It's either ID, task, due date, or is done. So there is no risk of SQL injection here. So I'm okay with that. I can do the literal, which means what? Put it in, don't quote. Right? It's like just put it as is, L literal. Okay, and that should be it. So let's test it. I'm going to go with Postman first. So I'll say, first of all, does it still work? Okay, not bad. I'm still getting my items. Okay, back. So now let's do, we say sort by, and I say due date. Send. Now you see, I got 146 was the order. Okay, this is either is not working or I just, oh yeah, the due dates are all the same. Hold on. I should get better data, right? More randomized, right? Yeah. Let's fix it. Hold on. So I got, what did I get? I got 146. Okay, let's mess it up a little. So let's say 4 would be 24. There I go. Yeah, that should do it. All right, so let's go back here to Postman, send it, and then there you go. See, 18th, 19th, 24th. Is that in order? Yes, it is. Right, sort by due date. Right, can I sort by task? Let's try this one. Task, send, and oh, this is boring. Okay, BTT, fine. Okay, let's mess it up again. How about Z by milk? Okay, that should be enough. Let's try again. There you go. See, my Z by milk is at the end. Order by task alphabetically. Okay, well, you guys get the idea. Now, if I put something wrong there, I'll say something task. Nice. 400 invalid sort value. See, 400 status bad request. Yeah, I'm good here. Okay, let's plug it in. So now that we got the server side working, let's plug it into the client. So the way we do that is we usually on the client want to be able to click on the columns. So if I click on, well, the ID number or the task, or yeah, I should not have logged out. Let's just do it again. If I click on task, due date, done, I want clicking on those to change the ordering, right? So if I'm clicking on the headers, I'd like to change the ordering. So I'll do just that. Okay, so where are the headers coming from? Well, they're coming from the reload or the refresh of data, right? When I'm reloading the data, I'm generating the headers there somewhere in my refresh to-do list. So let's go there to refresh to-do list, which was right here. There you go. See, these are my headers. So I need to split that, and I need to add an on click to each of them. I'm just gonna pretend I did type it up before. It's the same thing exactly. The only difference is that now I have sort by function called with the appropriate name of the column. So I'm calling a function in JavaScript sort by with parameter ID, task, due date, and is done. The backslashes, unfortunately, are required. Why? Because this is a single quoted string and I need a single quote inside. Okay, so that's why I need to escape those single quotes so that they actually appear in the in JavaScript as parameters to sort by. Okay, so now that I have it, I need to, well, implement sort by. Let's do that. So I have my function sort by, let's call it new order. Okay, and I also need to remember what is the current order of sorting. So I would say, let's create a new variable here, var sort order, right? And by default, I'll sort by ID. The initial sorting will be by ID. Okay, so let's go back here. So I'll say sort by. What it will do, it will actually just change. Let's just do this. Sort order to the new order, right? And then refresh to-do list. That's pretty much all I need to do here, right? Just change the sort order to the new order, refresh the to-do list. Now the refresh to-do list needs to be modified slightly. Over here in the URL, I need to include the information about the sort order. So I'll say, what was it? Order by? What do I have there? I had sort by. Yeah, sort by, and as a plus, sort order. There you go. That should do it, right? So this way, every time I'm requesting all the to-dos, I'll use the sort order, which is right here, right? And pass that information to the API to get the data in the order I want it to. Okay, let's see how that works. And Jerry at jerry.com, Jerry, let's see, login and, okay, so ID should be the default. Now let's see, I click on task for load, and there you have it, take Z, right, due date, 18/19/24, done, pending, done. Okay, that's weird. Oh, I know. It's because done is not alphabetical, because you could say, hold on, P, that's weird. P is after D, right? So why do
order? It's the order you have it in your enum, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's ordered not alphabetically, but it's ordered by the way you designed your enum. You got it exactly right. Because pending is first, done is second. That's exactly how we're gonna get it out. Yeah. All right, guys. So that's all there was, I think, about the client and the server. And so we did authentication, we did sorting, right? We did error handling. That is way better now. And I think that's pretty much it. Right, so the question is, when I was fetching this information, why not use array of args? Why do I have to do get query params? You see, if I did, so I could have done it, yes, but I would have to put that as part of my URL. You see, if those parameters that are after a question mark, they do not end up in the args. They don't. So if I wanted to do that, I could, but the design would be slightly different. I would have done to-dos like this, where the sort by would have been an optional, actually, I'm not even done here. That would be, hang in there. I would actually say, like this. So I would actually give it a regular expression, because then I don't have to actually verify this anymore, right? So I could do that, but I cannot do this if I'm using the question mark, because if it's a question mark, those parameters end up in query params. If it's part of the URL, so I'm using a slash here, right, as a separator, then yes, I could get this in my arguments. Okay, does it answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, but generally in an API, we would do the question mark with parameters instead, just the way I did it. right? Just like we saw in the video, there's usually a question mark, and then you tell the API, well, what do you want to fetch and how? Okay, good question though. Thanks. Anything else?
Sorry, a minor question.
Just give me a sec.
Yes, I had a question.
Mhm.
You know, when you use the order by and you use percentage %L and you mentioned something about direction, I didn't quite understand that.
Right. What I mean is that if you do percentage S over here,
Yeah.
then the query will put double quotes around this value,
Correct.
right? And escape any special characters. If you use percentage %L, that means literal, means that whatever you give it as a parameter, sort by over here, will be just kind of just like printf put in that place in the query without escaping. So no quotes, no escaping of special characters, just as is going to be just put in that spot in the query, which is useful when we need to modify the query. For example, if I want to have a query where some part of the query sometimes is there, sometimes is not, right? Let's say sometimes I do a join, sometimes I don't, right? So I'm not, because percentage S is great for percentage I, is great for values, because you need to put single quotes around them, you need to escape them. But if I'm writing a string that is part of the query, then I don't want quotes around it.
Okay. It's just a column. Okay.
Yeah. So no escaping. If I do L, there is no escaping, right? Which again is, you have to be careful, because that means that the data is put as a literal. Let's see if we got, should be in the query here somewhere. There you go. See those? This one. Right. Do not use with user supplied data, because the MySQLi real escape string is not called for BL, LB, and LL.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, good question. Okay, anything else, guys?